The subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. I want to welcome you all to today's hearing on presidential power to secure the border. I want to thank all of you for your patience. We were delayed by votes. That's the bad news. The good news is we won't be interrupted by votes during the hearing. And I think I'll begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. During a trip to the Yuma sector last year, we met with a group of Border Patrol agents. And I said, look, Congress writes the laws. We can't enforce them. So what laws do you need us to write? And to a person, these line agents all said, we don't need new laws. We need to enforce the laws we already have. At Eagle Pass in January, the head of the Border Patrol said, I'm standing in front of an open fire hydrant with a bucket. I don't need more buckets. I need someone to turn off the hydrant. Donald Trump did exactly that. He enforced our existing laws. He used Title 42 to stop millions of illegal crossings. He implemented the Remain in Mexico policy, requiring asylum claimants to remain in Mexico until their cases were heard. He enforced court-ordered deportations, and it worked. Illegal border crossings fell to a 46-year low. Now, the laws didn't change, but the administration changed. On Biden's first day in office, he ended the Remain in Mexico policy, he ordered ICE to stop enforcing court-ordered deportations, and he ordered all construction on the border wall to cease. And since that day, he has deliberately released into the country more than 4.5 million illegal aliens and allowed an additional 1.8 million to evade apprehension by the Border Patrol while it was overwhelmed by this influx. That's the combined population, the size of the state of Missouri, our 18th largest state with 8 congressional districts. Like I said, the laws didn't change. The enforcement of those laws changed. This crisis should be a surprise to no one. This is exactly what the Democrats promised to do. This is exactly what they have done. And this is exactly what they have defended every day for the last 3 years. Today, we will hear from officials who served in the Trump administration who will describe how the immigration laws were enforced with an eye toward border, interior, and national security. They will describe how enforcement has changed so radically under the Biden administration. You know, we can pass laws that make it harder to assert phony asylum claims, prevent future presidents from flouting the law as this one has done, finish the border wall that Border Patrol agents tell us is a critical tool for them, and we can put teeth into laws protecting American workers from the flood of cheap, illegal labor the Democrats have unleashed. And in fact, the House did that. It did all of that by passing H.R. 2. Senate Democrats refused to take it up. Instead, they support a bill that the Senate can't pass. That bill would make it impossible for a future president to secure the border by requiring the lease of 4,000 such claimants a day into the country before the president can take any action. Current law requires the detention of all such claimants. The Senate bill would require the release of all such claimants while tapping American taxpayers for another $1.6 billion on top of the billions we are already paying to support them and to encourage millions more still to come. Under the Senate bill, even when an administration can finally use the weak authority to shut down the border's never really shut down, as the bill requires at least 1,400 illegal aliens a day to be processed into the country at ports of entry, at a minimum. The American people are coming to well understand the implications to the safety, security, and prosperity of our nation. Our public schools are being overwhelmed by illegals requiring education. New York estimates the cost to be $1 billion a year so far. Well, that's the same as a $1 billion cut to the New York City schools for New Yorkers. Our homeless shelters and social programs have been overwhelmed to the point that services are now being cut or denied for Americans. Fatal drugs like fentanyl are now flooding our streets. Entirely preventable and tragic violent crimes are reported daily. Violent criminal gangs and international crime cartels are now operating in our cities, and sanctuary policies protect these criminals from deportation and, in many cases, even from detention. And here's the fine point of the matter. The president has the authority to stop this. Trump did. Biden did not. Far worse, Biden's policies have actively aided and abetted this catastrophe. Congress can't fix this by laws that won't be passed or by bills that won't be passed or laws that won't be enforced when they are passed. Ultimately, this crisis can only be fixed by replacing this administration with one that is determined to secure our borders, protect our people, and uphold the rule of law. And that can only be done by the American people at the ballot box. Today, our witnesses include some of the architects of the successful Trump administration immigration policies, and I would urge my colleagues to listen attentively to what these experts have to say. The policies they helped put in place worked to reduce illegal immigration and to secure the border. President Biden's policies do the exact opposite, and we can see that so clearly today. And with that, I'll yield back and now recognize the ranking member, Ms. Jayapal, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I welcome all of our witnesses. Mr. Chairman, it feels like we've been stuck in a time loop since this Congress began. House Republicans struggle and often fail to do the most basic aspects of governing, while this committee continues to hold the same hearings on the border. And today seems no different. Today's hearing appears to be an attempt by my Republican colleagues to justify their inability and lack of desire to act in a bipartisan fashion to address the border and fix the broken immigration system. And I think it's important for us to take a step back and remember how we got here. Earlier in this Congress, Republicans passed their cruel, inhumane, and unworkable border bill, H.R. 2, through the House. After its passage, all we heard from our colleagues was that H.R. 2 could secure the border. That bill has since failed twice to pass the United States Senate, rejected on a bipartisan basis. Then, after insisting for months that the only way to address the border was through harsh border security legislation, former President Trump instructed Republicans to dismiss out of hand a bipartisan border bill that Minority Leader Mitch McConnell called the strongest and toughest border bill in 30 years, and that was written by the second most conservative senator in the United States Senate, James Lankford. Immediately, Speaker Johnson and others began to claim the president doesn't need this legislation. President Biden can secure the border through executive actions. There's no bills needed at all. Let us be clear. The American people are not stupid. They know that Republicans do not actually want to solve or address the situation at the border because Republicans have said that. Donald Trump has said that over and over again. Let's not do anything to solve the problem at the border. Let's keep it out there as an issue for the election. As we have heard from multiple Republicans, including on this subcommittee, they would rather weaponize the border as a political issue for this election year. Today's hearing will not bring my colleagues the answers that they are looking for, because the reality is no, the president cannot, quote, close the border. Speaker Johnson and others have said that all president needs to do is to use Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act to, quote, shut down the border to all border crossers. However, what they seem to forget is that President Trump tried to do exactly that in November of 2018, and he was stopped by our courts. Even the Supreme Court refused to intervene and lift the lower court injunction. But whether the president can technically close the border or not actually misses the point. The reality is, attempts to use cruel and inhumane deterrence and enforcement alone, which is what President Trump and other administrations have tried to do, simply does not work. Let's think back. When President Trump implemented the Remain in Mexico program early in 2019, did people stop crossing the border? No. No, they did not. In fact, that summer, we saw some of the highest levels of immigration of the entire Trump administration. And we saw the same thing with the use of Title 42. When President Trump used Title 42 to turn back all border crossers, encounters between the ports of entry shot up, not down. They went up. Remember, Title 42 was also a boon to cartels. Knowing that they would be turned away under Title 42, migrants were forced to rely on cartels to try to get smuggled into the country between points of entry. Cartels actually offered packages for migrants to make multiple attempts at crossing. One migrant was apprehended over 40 times, just one alone. Human smugglers told reporters that Title 42 saved them money, with some going as far as to say, quote, "It's great for us." This is the cartels we're talking about. Let me be very clear that the vast majority of these people that are coming across the border, migrants, do not want to engage with cartels. They want to follow a legal process. And they do follow a legal process when we provide workable ways for people to seek entry and refuge. As I have said all Congress, the best way to help secure the border is to expand lawful pathways and adequately fund the immigration system. We have not updated the legal immigration system in this country in over 30 years. The more broken the legal immigration system is, the more people will try to come to the border as the only means of entry. We should be having hearings on this committee about how we can expand lawful immigration to the United States and how it benefits the United States. Just last month, the Congressional Budget Office said that because of the recent increase in immigration, over the next 10 years, the economy is going to grow by $7 trillion, and revenues will increase by $1 trillion. This was further backed up by another new government study by the Department of Health and Human Services, which shows that refugees and asylees have a net positive impact of $124 billion over 10 years. I ask for unanimous consent, Mr. Chairman, to enter those studies into the record.
Without objection.
Unfortunately, the Republicans have time and time again blocked additional funding and seem to oppose more legal immigration. They are not interested in real solutions, and that is extremely unfortunate for the American people, for all of us across the country who want to get to a real solution. I look forward to hearing from all of our witnesses and the perspectives they bring on this issue, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much. I'll next recognize the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Nadler, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, no president has ever had the ability to fully stop unlawful crossings. The notion that the president has all the authority, not to mention the resources, that he needs to solve all the issues at the border with a stroke of his pen is a fantasy. It has been dreamed up by a Republican Party desperate to justify their rejection of a bipartisan Senate deal to address border security. They are embarrassed to admit that the real reason they abandoned the deal was because Donald Trump told them to. At the behest of Donald Trump, Republicans cannot take yes for an answer. They are tying themselves in knots, not willing to do anything to actually address the border or to fix our immigration system because they want to keep immigration alive as a campaign issue. So now they have changed course. Despite spending the last year claiming that the only solution to the border crisis was their absurd and unworkable messaging bill H.R. 2, a bill that got only 32 votes in the Senate last week, House Republicans now tell us that the president's had the authority to fix the border all along. He just won't use it. What a joke. What pure hogwash. Let's take a trip down memory lane. We have not meaningfully updated our immigration system in 30 years. Congress has tried multiple times to enact comprehensive immigration reform. The Senate last tried in 2013. House Republicans have stood in the way of progress at every turn. House Republicans have also refused to provide additional resources and personnel for the border. In 2021, all but 6 current House Republicans voted against the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which provided additional funding to ports of entry to combat smuggling of people and drugs. And by the way, we know that most fentanyl, almost all the fentanyl, comes in hidden in trucks that pass through ports of entry. And the way to stop the importation of fentanyl and the poisoning of our people is not to worry about individual migrants, it's to increase the inspection facilities at the points of entry. But Republicans don't want to do that. All but 2 current House Republicans voted against providing robust funding for border security operations in the FY 2023 appropriations omnibus legislation. That bill provided more than $17 billion to Customs and Border Protection, including funding for an additional 300 Border Patrol agents. The omnibus also included $60 million to hire 125 CPB officers and $70 million for non-intrusive inspection technology to detect narcotics like fentanyl and firearms at ports of entry. Then in October 2023, President Biden asked Congress for additional funding to support CBP in securing our ports of entry from drugs, to create a more orderly process at our border, and to hire more asylum officers and judges so cases could be heard in weeks, not years. He also proposed providing the support that Ukraine and other allies around the world desperately need. Support, I might add, that does not just go abroad, but that runs through manufacturing towns all across America. But again, in Donald Trump's direction, Republicans said no. Instead, they made what they thought would be an impossible demand, that they would not provide aid to Ukraine or fund the president's border request unless policy measures to secure the border were attached. And then, to their surprise and horror, Democrats actually reached across the aisle to work with them towards a bipartisan solution, throwing a wrench into their plans. Republicans want to believe that Democrats are the caricatures they paint us as on Fox and Newsmax. But what they fail to understand is that all we want is a government that works for the people. That's why we fight for a humane immigration system, an expanded social safety net, and protections for women, people of color, and LGBTQIA plus people. But most importantly, they fail to understand that we govern responsibly. We don't allow ourselves to fall into chaos that does nothing but weaken us on the world stage. So House Republicans were caught flat-footed when Senate Democrats worked with Republicans to craft a bill to meet their border demands, a bill that Minority Leader Mitch McConnell called the strongest border bill in 30 years, that Senators Thune and Graham said contained measures that could never be passed in a Republican-led Senate. But even this bill, which contained provisions that I and many of my colleagues on this side of the aisle found deeply troubling, was not enough for House Republicans. They bowed to the demands of Donald Trump that they preserve the immigration issue for his campaign, and they killed the bill before it even got off the ground. As ever, they could not bring themselves to take yes for an answer. And so now, in a desperate attempt to save face, they're switching tactics. Despite the months they spent saying that H.R. 2 was the silver bullet, and that legislation was absolutely necessary to fix the border, now they say that the system had a magic silver bullet in it all along. Speaker Johnson and the Chaos Caucus are insisting that the president can simply use Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act to prevent immigrants from crossing the border. If this sounds like a familiar argument to you, it should. That's because President Trump tried to do exactly that in 2018, and he was immediately shot down by the courts. The president does not have the authority to unilaterally shut down the border. Neither our laws nor our democracy allow such a power. To pretend otherwise is absurd. Congress must work together to provide the legal tools and the resources necessary to address the border crisis. I know that there are Democrats willing to put in the hard work, but so far House Republicans have proven that Democrats have no partner in this effort. And so, while I look forward to hearing from our witnesses, we already know the answer to the question that the majority is posing today, and more importantly, we know exactly why they are posing it. MAGA Republicans want to talk about the border, but they don't want to do anything about it for the most partisan, cynical reasons. I yield back.
The gentleman is back. Chair is now pleased to recognize the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the chairman. I won't make a statement. I want to get on with the testimony here from these fine witnesses, but I want to mostly thank the chairman for putting this hearing together on this critical subject that the American people care deeply about. With that, I would yield back.
Thank you. Well, then we'll now go to our panel of witnesses, and I want to again thank them for their patience for the delay. The witnesses we have today are Mr. Art Arthur. He's the resident fellow in law and policy for the Center for Immigration Studies. Prior to that, Mr. Arthur served in the Immigration and Naturalization Service General Counsel's Office as a counsel in the House Judiciary Committee, as an immigration judge, and as staff director for the National Security Subcommittee for the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform. He earned a JD from George Washington School of Law and a bachelor's at the University of Virginia. Mr. Tom Homan is the former acting director of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement during the Trump administration, serving in senior roles at ICE during several administrations. He has 34 years of experience in federal immigration enforcement, and he currently serves as a visiting fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Next is Mr. Aaron Reichland Melnick. Mr. Reichland Melnick is currently the policy director at the American Immigration Council, where he's also served as a policy counsel and a staff attorney. Prior to that, he was a justice fellow on the Immigrant Justice Corps and the Legal Aid Society in New York. He earned a JD at Georgetown University Law Center and a bachelor's at Brandeis University. He's here at the invitation of the minority. And finally, we have Mr. Gene Hamilton. Mr. Hamilton serves as Vice President and General Counsel of American First Legal. Prior to that, Mr. Hamilton served as counselor to the Attorney General at the Department of Justice during the Trump administration. He previously served as senior counselor to the Secretary of Homeland Security and as general counsel to the senator on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Mr. Hamilton earned his JD from the Washington and Lee School of Law and his bachelor's from the University of Georgia. I'd like to welcome these witnesses today, thank them again for appearing, and we'll begin by swearing you in. Would you please rise and raise your right hand? Do you swear or affirm under penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is true and correct to the best of your knowledge, information, and belief, so help you God? Let the record show the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. And please know that your written testimony will be entered into the record in its entirety. Accordingly, we'd ask that you summarize your testimony in 5 minutes, and we'll begin with Mr. Arthur.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to don't want to correct the chairman, I never actually served in the Trump administration. I served from the George H.W. Bush administration through President Barack Obama. Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me here today. The topic is timely, as we are in the midst of an unprecedented border crisis. Every month, tens of thousands are apprehended at the southwest border, even while more than 43,000 others, without visas, schedule appointments at the border ports. The vast majority are released, which, as a federal judge found last March, is driving the border crisis. And that doesn't count tens of thousands who evade agents monthly, so-called gotaways. Their entries are imposing billions in fiscal costs on states and localities for housing, healthcare, education, and other expenses. And as the 2024 DHS Homeland Security Threat Assessment has explained, this crisis has created a vulnerability, quote, terrorists and criminal actors may exploit, close quote. The Constitution and the Immigration and Nationality Act provide the president with numerous and sufficient authorities to bring security to the border, which I discussed at length in my written testimony. Key, however, is detention, which has been mandated for aliens at the ports since 1903 and for unlawful entrants since 1996. Unlike preceding administrations, the current one has largely failed to comply with those statutory mandates, instead ending family detention entirely while asking Congress for fewer detention beds in succeeding budgets and claiming they'll be sufficient to comply with DHS's statutory mandates. They're not. The DHS secretary, under 8 United States Code section 1368B, is supposed to tell this committee every 6 months how many beds the department needs to meet those requirements. If it has sent you those semi-annual reports, it's news to me. But Congress must fund that detention and the resources needed to adjudicate those aliens' cases and removals. That will be costly at first, but those costs will quickly drop as entries drop. As long as illegal entrants know they'll be released to live and work here indefinitely, pending the adjudication of their asylum claims, they'll continue to come. Detention also allows DHS to screen out those with valid asylum claims and remove the rest. As importantly, it would shift the costs of caring for those migrants from the cities and states to the federal government where it belongs. Such detention must be humane and provide those housed sustenance, medical care, and education. As a judge, I had jurisdiction over a family center that exceeded all of those standards. A 2015 district court order in Flores versus Lynch, however, prevents DHS from housing families for more than 20 days. I respectfully disagree with the conclusions therein. In 2019, a federal bipartisan panel concluded that the children in those families are traumatized by the illegal journey here, and that parents and children alike are particularly vulnerable to criminal predation. The panel found that Flores had exacerbated the pull factors drawing those migrants to this country and called on Congress to reverse it by legislation. Failing that, it asked DHS to issue regulations replacing that order and allowing for family migrant detention. The last administration did so, only to have those regulations enjoined. The incoming Biden administration failed to seek Supreme Court review and has also failed to issue regulations of its own. More than 1.8 million family aliens have been apprehended at the southwest border since February 2021. The administration can also use diplomacy to encourage its regional partners to secure their own borders, which would deter new arrivals from abroad. The U.S. accounts for 25% of global GDP and is Mexico's most important trading partner. Reports suggest that the Biden administration has used its diplomatic power to encourage greater enforcement in that country, but more can be done. Last May, the administration did attempt to restrict asylum for aliens entering illegally and until recently was fighting court challenges against it. Last month, however, DOJ asked the courts to pause those cases pending settlement negotiations. I commend to you the February 21 order in one of those cases, East Bay Sanctuary Covenant versus Biden, and in particular the dissent by Judge Lawrence Van Dyke. I take no position on the claims that Judge Van Dyke makes, but in any event, it's incumbent on DOJ and DHS to coordinate any administrative action securing the border to ensure challenges will be litigated forcefully into a conclusion. In September 1994, Barbara Jordan, former member of this committee and chairman of the U.S. Committee on Immigration Reform, appeared before this subcommittee and warned that, quote, if we cannot control illegal immigration, we cannot sustain our national interest in legal immigration. Look at the polling, talk to your constituents, and you'll see that's what's happening today. That's bad because America needs immigration, albeit on the terms Congress has established. The administration and this Congress can and must do more to secure the border. The stakes are too high not to. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Great, thank you very much for your testimony. I'm next pleased to welcome Mr. Tom Homan back before this committee.
All right, you have my written statement. I'm not going to read an oral statement. I'm just going to talk. I started as a Border Patrol agent in 1984. I became a special agent, climbed the ranks, become the first ICE director that actually came up through the ranks. I worked for 6 presidents, starting with Ronald Reagan. I've seen a lot of policies come and go. I see policies that worked, policies that didn't. Every president I ever worked for took border security serious. Clinton and Obama took it serious. They took steps to secure the border because they understood, like every other president, you can't have strong national security if you don't have strong border security. But understand this, President Biden is the first president in history of this nation who came in office and unsecured the border on purpose by signing over 90 executive orders, abolishing everything we did that were successful policies. And the result of that is over 1,700 aliens have died entering this country. Historic record. 340 no-inspected terrorists off the terrorist watch list have been arrested. Southern border, almost twice as many in northern border. Historic record. 114,000 people have died from fentanyl overdoses. That's coming across an open border. An historic record. Sex trafficking of women and children, 600% increase. Historic record. Over 450,000 children have crossed this border with the use of cartels. This administration has lost track of almost 100,000 of them. We know where they are. We found some in forced labor. We found some in sex trafficking. We found some in death bondage. On top of that, we got 1.9 million known gotaways. Not a guess. Known gotaways, 1.9. Border Patrol's arrested people from 181 different countries. Some of these countries are sponsors of terror. They've arrested 340 on the southern border. How many of that 1.9 came from countries sponsoring terror? If you think it's 0, you're wrong. At the same time he destroyed the border, he abolished ICE. I said for a long time, they're never going to abolish ICE. They'll never abolish a federal agency. Well, they didn't abolish the agency. They abolished their mission. And the latest victim of that, her name is Laken Riley, a young woman who was murdered by an illegal alien in Georgia, a young lady who tried to call 911 because she was about to enter hell, because she was being attacked by somebody. She was living in terror the last few minutes. You got to think of the way this young lady died, horrific murder, death. She tried to get help. She fought for her life, and she died. And she's one out of so many. I've met hundreds of angel moms and dads through my career, hundreds. And how did this administration fail Laken Riley? First of all, the perpetrator should never have been in the country. He shouldn't have been in New York. He shouldn't have been in Georgia. He should have been in Mexico in the Remain in Mexico program that this administration abolished. Even if they didn't have the Remain in Mexico program, he should have been detained when he entered the country illegally without proper documentation. The law says you shall be detained, not maybe, shall. He was released. And then in New York City, he was arrested for a crime, And you read the newspaper say, well, New York City's at fault because they're a sanctuary city. Well, that's part of the story. But the other part of the story, let's say they didn't release them. Based on this memorandum by Secretary Mayorkas on ICE priorities, ICE wouldn't have dropped a detainer on him anyways, because he wasn't bad enough criminal for ICE to drop a detainer on him. Even though the law says there's no prerequisite to commit a crime after you commit the crime of illegal entry to be a target for enforcement. But Secretary Mayorkas has taken a lot of criminal aliens off the table for ICE. And how do I know that? By sheer numbers. 57% decrease in arrested criminal aliens under this administration. 68% decrease in at-large arrest of criminal aliens. 44% decrease in detainer requests for criminal aliens. 67% decrease in deportations of criminal aliens. 55% decrease in immigration-related criminal convictions. Laken Riley was just released, was just the latest victim. There'll be another one next week. Matter of fact, there's been 2 since her. And when we leave her today, nothing's going to change. This administration wants to secure the border. They've had 3 years to take action. Why did they wait now? Well, there must be an election coming up. Then they come up with a bill in Senate that they know will never pass the House, so they can say, well, now it's the Republicans' fault. And they want to blame President Trump for his actions. People say President Trump's inhumane. Tom Homan's inhumane. We're racist. When Trump had illegal immigration at a 40, 45-year low, how many women didn't get raped? How many children weren't lost? How many women and children weren't sex trafficked? How many pounds of fentanyl didn't get in the country to kill Americans? President Trump's policy saved lives. Bottom line, the data shows it. And this administration has destroyed the most secure border I've seen in my lifetime in 34 years doing this job. And that's just a stone cold fact. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll next hear from Mr. Reichlin Melnick.
Chairman Jordan, Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Aaron Reichlin Melnick. I'm the Policy Director at the American Immigration Council, a nonprofit organization dedicated to the belief that immigrants are part of our national fabric and to ensuring that the United States provides a fair process for all immigrants, including those seeking protection. There should be no doubt that we need new laws and more resources to respond to the current situation at the border. The last time Congress made any major changes to the asylum process was 1996, when the Macarena was still a hit dance craze and the main concern at the border was Mexican laborers seeking work. Our asylum system was designed in a largely pre-digital age before the rise of social media, smartphones, translation apps, and a world that has become smaller than ever. Over the last decade, presidential authority to address the border has been stretched as far as it can go and often taken beyond what the law allows. Every president over the last 20 years, from Bush through Biden, has called for changes in the law and for more resources. Even President Trump previously said in 2018 that, quote, the only long-term solution, end quote, was for Congress to act. But despite decades of bipartisan agreement that Congress needs to legislate, with of course stark disagreements as to how, in recent months an unusual theory has taken hold, that the president can shut the US-Mexico border to migrants with the stroke of a pen and no help from Congress. This theory is fundamentally wrong. No such authority exists, not even Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which in 2018 President Trump tried and failed to use to shut the border. But even if there were some overlooked law on the books which authorized the president to turn away everyone, operational and diplomatic limitations prevent any president from simply shutting the border overnight. First, US and international law still require a screening for anyone who expresses a fear of persecution before deportation, even if asylum itself is banned. And without enough asylum officers to carry out those screenings, even a policy which bars asylum to all migrants can only be applied at the border to a limited number of people. This is not theoretical. In May, the Biden administration restricted asylum for nearly all migrants crossing the border outside ports of entry. But even though DHS is currently setting new records for credible fear interviews, nearly double the number of credible fear interviews done under the Trump administration, lack of asylum officers means that most people crossing can't have this restriction applied until years later in court in front of an immigration judge. And other issues exist too. Many migrants arriving at the border today cannot be deported at all because there is no country that is willing to take them. For example, Venezuela, a country which we have subject to intense sanctions, has for years retaliated by barring direct U.S. deportation flights. Fewer than 3,000 Venezuelans have been deported via commercial airlines in the last decade, and when the Biden administration briefly got Venezuela to restart deportation flights, they ended in a matter of months because once again the Maduro regime cracked down on elections and stopped the planes. So how do we fix this? Well, hiring more immigration judges and asylum officers is an easy first step. A robust infusion of resources over time will eliminate bottlenecks and allow us to carry out basic screenings and decide asylum cases in months, not years. But we also need innovative thinking about restructuring the system for modern challenges that we face today. For example, migrants must wait years for their cases to be heard in the system that is backlogged as it is. But back in 1996, we made it illegal for asylum seekers to work and support themselves in the months after they arrive. If asylum seekers could work, they wouldn't have to sit around in shelters all day, and they could support themselves. And if the federal government played a leading role in coordinating arrivals, cities could work together and tap federal resources to get people on their feet as they go through the process with limited impact on local budget and an improvement of the process for everyone. Beyond providing sufficient resources to reestablish a functioning asylum system, Congress must also pay attention to our legal immigration system, which is plagued with backlogs and rising costs. Not only are we driving away the world's best and brightest, but our broken legal immigration system helps unscrupulous actors sell migrants on the idea that the asylum system is their only way to seek the American dream. Over the last decade, we've seen presidents try more and more aggressive crackdowns and ramped up enforcement. It has not worked. So today, Congress has a choice. Do we kick the can down the road yet again, or do we do the one thing that we haven't tried and rebuild our broken asylum system, hiring more asylum officers, cutting backlogs, and giving people a fair shot? I urge legislators to address this issue with the seriousness it deserves and not to fall for a myth that can be solved overnight. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
And finally, we'll hear from Mr. Hamilton.
Thank you. Chairman McClintock, Ranking Member Jayapal, other members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today about this important issue. Laken Riley, Kayla Hamilton, Kate Steinley, Elizabeth Medina, Melissa Powell, and her son Reardon. These are just a few of the Americans who have been killed by illegal aliens who should not have been in the United States. And these are tragically just a few victims, not to mention the countless victims of assault, sexual assault, human trafficking, smuggling, and other crimes affecting American communities across the United States, as my colleague Mr. Homan articulated. Congress has provided the president and the executive branch with significant, powerful tools that can secure the border. Unfortunately, the situation we see today, the chaos, the crime, the overwhelmed cities and states, and the tearing apart of the very fabric of our nation, is the result of deliberate, intentional policy decisions made throughout the Biden administration since January 20th of 2021. President Biden himself bears responsibility for the situation today. The Biden administration has abandoned reason, common sense, and fidelity to the law when it comes to our immigration system. They have opted to end effective immigration enforcement policies employed by prior administrations of both political parties, and knowingly adopted policies that facilitate the entry of millions of illegal aliens into the United States. No society can thrive, much less sustain itself, under the pressures and damage caused by these decisions. As a country defined by our commitment to the rule of law, and given our exceptional position in recorded human history, we must acknowledge some fundamental principles when it comes to border security and our immigration system. Every country has a sovereign right and responsibility to control its borders, and the United States is no different. The United States is the greatest country in the world, and hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people worldwide would come here if they could, but we cannot accommodate even a fraction of those people. Most illegal aliens are not asylum seekers. Deporting illegal aliens from the United States advances our national sovereignty and is an essential component of our immigration system. Further, doing so accords due respect for the individuals who obey our laws and come through the legal established visa programs. For those individuals who do not intend to use our visa system, but want to come to the United States anyways, only one thing matters: getting released into the interior of the United States. And of course then, releasing illegal aliens into the interior of the United States fundamentally results in more illegal aliens trying to come to the United States. The Biden administration's publicly available data demonstrate that southwest border encounters are at record highs. The overwhelming majority of illegal aliens encountered at the southwest border are released into the interior of the United States. The Biden administration is adding millions of illegal aliens into the population who are already here. They know that using tools like migrant protection protocols, asylum cooperative agreements, expedited removal, visa sanctions on countries that refuse to take back their nationals, detention of aliens who are apprehended at the border pending the outcome of their immigration court proceedings, and other effective uses of law would end the crisis at the border relatively quickly. But they don't actually want an end to this crisis. I'm happy to answer your questions, and thank you for your attention to this matter.
Great, thank you very much for your testimony. We'll now move to questions by the committee's members, and we'll begin with Mr. Tiffany.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Hamilton, I'd like to add a story from northern Wisconsin in my district. Stephen Nashholm is dead. He is dead today. Just died a month ago when a second-time DWI offendant who was here illegally in America, got his first DWI a little over a year ago, allowed to skate, not detained, and now a father of 3 daughters in northern Wisconsin is dead as a result of what is going on down at the southern border. So I think I'll start with you, Mr. Arthur. We heard from Mr. Melnick that we could be employing all these people that are here illegally in America. It seems like the most robust wage growth that happened for those people in the lower socioeconomic scale 4 years ago happened during the previous administration in like 20 or 30 years. Is that accurate?
It is, Mr. Tiffany. Wages amongst Hispanic Americans, African Americans increased during that period of time.
And we heard about these backlogs of people that want to come into our country legally. Does all of this, 10 million people at this point, does that help alleviate the backlogs that we have here?
Respectfully, I would disagree with Mr. Melnick. The pull factors that it creates encourage people to, even greater numbers of people to come here illegally. And in addition, and this is a problem that we're going to be facing for years to come right now, it creates smuggling networks that other nationals from countries far away from the United States, not traditional sending countries, can then use to come to this country.
Mr. Homan, we heard that enforcement has not worked. Administration after administration, enforcement has not worked. Is that your experience?
Absolutely not. There has to be a consequence. Look, you can't demand have the right to claim asylum. I got a right to see a judge. You can get order removed, then we don't execute the order. If that's the case, shut down the immigration courts, take the Border Patrol off the border. There has to be a consequence. Entering this country illegally is a crime. It is not okay. So we have to execute final orders removal. And that's why lately there's been a lot of hate on, Trump said he's going to run the biggest deportation operation in history. Well, he's going to have to, because we just went through the largest historic illegal immigration crisis we've ever seen, and 90% of these people lose their case and get order removal. They need to be removed.
Mr. Hamilton, I was recently down on the southern border and stopped at Casa Elitas, one of the links in the chain for illegal immigration here in America, the NGOs that are doing their work. Just first, I'd throw out to you generally, is it correct, my observation, that NGOs, along with the cartels, the United Nations, and our United States government are a critical link in this chain at this point of bringing people into our country illegally?
Absolutely. That's fundamentally true. There's absolutely no doubt about that based on my personal experience, observations in the past, and what's happening today.
Are you familiar with the story of the Red Cross passing out maps to illegal immigrants as they go through Central America and Mexico to show them their way here?
I've heard of such things, yes.
Is that, I would defer to the two gentlemen on the left. Isn't that accurate that that has happened?
Yes.
And the, isn't it also accurate that organizations like the International Organization for Migration, which I think we fund 25% of the United Nations, don't we? Something like that. Isn't it also accurate that they are passing out prepaid debit cards?
That's correct.
So the NGOs are a critical chain in this part of this whole chain for illegal immigration. What should we do in regards to those NGOs that are facilitating illegal immigration, that are a link in the chain? Go ahead.
Well, I think you need to stop funding them, first of all, because, you know, while there's thousands of empty ICE beds at about $117 a night, sitting empty, we'll pay an NGO to put them in a hotel room in New York City for $500 a night, 3 meals a day, free medical care, work authorization. I mean, you're rewarding illegal behavior. So I think, and when they're in ICE detention, the average length of stays is 35 to 40 days. When they get out, it'll be years.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to yield back. It seems like the NGOs are profiting off from this.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Jayapal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to start by noting that one of our witnesses was one of the leading architects of the Trump administration's cruel and horrific family separation policy. I was the first member of Congress to go and meet with separated moms detained in federal prison. I heard firsthand how the Trump administration imposed a zero humanity policy to prosecute parents in mass court proceedings, resulting in the United States government under Donald Trump tearing thousands of children from their moms and dads. None of the mothers that I met with even got to say goodbye to their children. Some were put in rooms right next to their children, and they could hear their children sobbing for them, and they never got to say goodbye. I am still to this day haunted by the testimonials that I heard from parents and from children. The Department of Justice Inspector General came out with a detailed report that says that Attorney General Sessions and his top aides, like our witness, Mr. Hamilton, were the key drivers of that policy. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to enter that report into the record.
Without objection.
We have memos that were leaked, filled with edits and comments from Mr. Hamilton, where he clearly approves of a plan to, quote, begin separating family units, end quote, and is even looking for ways to ensure that children who are separated from their families are removed as quickly as possible. I ask unanimous consent that that be placed into the record as well.
Without objection.
And thanks to Democratic oversight efforts, we know the tragic results of Donald Trump's cruel family separation policy today. As many as 2,000 children still remain separated from their parents. And we have testimony from child welfare experts that the best available evidence shows that Donald Trump's policy of tearing children from their parents, quote, entails very significant and potentially lifelong risks of psychological and physical harm. So, Mr. Hamilton, my question for you is simple. Do you regret the role that you played in the family separation policy? Yes or no?
I would refer you to the statement that I provided.
I asked for a yes or no answer.
I'm giving
Do
you an answer. I'm not going to give you a yes or no. I would refer you to the statement that I provided to the Inspector General about my assessment of their report and the accuracy thereof.
A 2021 DOJ Inspector General report determined that your office, after investigation, after talking to you, the Office of the Attorney General was the, quote, driving force behind the family separation policy. The Deputy Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, actually issued a statement of regret for his role. I assume that you have no such statement of regret to offer us today?
I think if you read my statement and not just the hatchet job that the Inspector General's office issued, you would see my feelings about the matter.
The evidence clearly indicates that your zero humanity policy was intended to permanently separate children from their parents. It is a fact that DOJ did not coordinate with HHS or even give HHS a heads up on the policy before rolling out the family separation policy. And as you know very well, children deemed or rendered unaccompanied are in HHS custody, and the DOJ Inspector General noted your own experience coordinating across multiple agencies to implement policy. You knew very well, Mr. Hamilton, exactly what you were doing. Your former colleague, Attorney General Sessions' Chief of Staff, Matt Whitaker, admitted to me under oath in this room that DOJ did not have a system in place at the outset of the family separation on the prosecution side to track separated parents and children. No less than 5 of your own prosecutors raised concerns with you about what was to happen to separated kids in the days after you released the policy. And your boss's response was, we need to take away children. And I am deeply troubled that you can't even do what Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein did and actually say that you regret your role in that absolute catastrophe. Mr. Melnick, very quickly, because I only have 18 seconds left, my colleagues claim that Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act gives the president the ability to shut down the border. Can you please explain why that's inaccurate and what happened when former President Trump tried to rely on that so-called authority to shut down the border?
Well, just as quickly as I can, it cannot override the Immigration and Nationality Act. As
your microphone.
The Supreme Court itself said, both in 2018 and
Microphone.
just really quickly, but the Supreme Court said in both 1993 and in 2018 that 212F cannot override the core provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act. One of those is the right to seek asylum regardless of how a person enters the country. Therefore, you just cannot use it for this authority. It can be used to interdict people at sea, but that's different because they haven't arrived on U.S. soil. Migrants who've already crossed the border and are on U.S. soil cannot be turned away without
Lady's
authority.
time has
Thank you. I yield
expired. Chairman Jordan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hamilton, did Joe Biden cause this problem?
Yes,
He not only caused the problem, he told us he was going to cause the problem, didn't he?
he absolutely did.
In the Democrat debate in 2020, here's what then candidate Joe Biden said. Migrants should, quote, immediately surge to the border. They took him up on his offer. So the idea that the Democrats say, oh, no, it was Trump who caused the problem. It's Republicans who caused the problem. It's climate change that caused the problem is BS. Joe Biden caused it, and he told us he was going to do it. And what has that resulted in? 8 million migrants coming into the country in 3 years and 47 days. 8 million. And we're on pace to get to 12 million. That is the magnitude of the problem. Mr. Hamilton, has that magnitude of that volume of individuals coming to our country, has that put a strain on the United States, on communities and everything else?
Absolutely. Anyone can look and talk to mayors, talk to local communities, talk to governors, and see the results themselves for
Has it
themselves.
put a strain on
and see their words.
schools?
Yes.
Remember in New York when they told parents, your kids can't come to school today because we have to put migrants in the schools. They're going to have to learn remotely.
Correct.
Did it put a strain on hospitals?
Yes.
How about law enforcement?
Yes.
All kinds of law enforcement concerns, not just the attacks on law enforcement, all kinds of other concerns, right?
Correct.
Concern on safety in communities around our country, not just on the border. Did it put a concern on safety? How about municipal budgets? Is there a concern there?
Yes.
Because of this problem that Joe Biden told us he was going to cause and actually caused? Have migrants died in this journey coming here because Joe Biden told them to surge to our border and come into our country?
Yes.
Kids,
Yes.
women, all kinds of terrible things happen to them.
Absolutely.
And then back to your opening statement. Have Americans died?
Yes.
Laken Riley, Kate Steinle, and others, right?
Correct.
That is the magnitude of this problem, and we're on pace. We're on pace to get to 12 million in the 4 years of Joe Biden being president. I tell people often that is equivalent to the entire population of our state. And we're a big state. We're the 7th largest state in this great country. 12 million people. So here's where I think we're at. We know the cause of the problem. We know the magnitude of the problem. What's the solution? Seems to me we call time out. Seems to me we say no more. Let's just stop. Let's not exacerbate the problem. Let's just say time out. And I've advocated for a simple sentence that I want you guys to comment on. I've advocated for a sentence in an appropriation bill that says no money can be used to process any more or release into the country any new migrants. What do you think about that, Mr. Hamilton?
I think that would be a wonderful idea.
And don't you think the American, I've never seen, in my time, I've been in politics a few years now. I don't know if I've ever seen an issue with this intensity. We got a time with record inflation. We take your family out to dinner in the Biden American economy. Right now, you take your family out to dinner, it's $300 just to take your family out for a nice meal in this Biden inflation world. But what's the number one issue in polling across the board? It's the border. That's how intense this issue is with the American people. And maybe we should just say time out. Let's stop now. What do you think, Mr. Homan? Should we do that?
I think we need to secure the border and save lives. And bottom line is, I understand one of the congresswomen met with separated families' parents. Did she meet with Laken Riley's parents? How many of them met with, we got angel moms and dads by the thousands who separated from their families, but they buried their children because of the open border.
I'm all for securing the border. We passed good legislation a year ago that would do that. What I'm saying is when the problem is this, when the magnitude of the problem is where it is now, you know, the old line, when you're in a hole, quit digging, right? Like, let's quit making it worse by allowing more and more people to come into the country. Maybe we should say time out and then focus in on securing the border, of course, but just stop the influx that we see. And that's what I'm asking you. Do you think that makes sense now?
We have to stop the influx.
Yep. Mr. Arthur?
Mr. Chairman, it's clear that we have to stop the influx. This is unsustainable. In fact, President Obama did an interview, former President Obama did an interview on ABC, Good Morning America, back in September 2021. And he talked about the humanitarian concerns. We're humanitarian people, that we have instincts for that. But he noted the fact that open borders are unsustainable. Mr. Chairman, right now we're seeing the unsustainability of open borders. Cities and towns across the United States. I live in North Carolina. We don't really have a whole lot of illegal immigrant problems. But the people in North Carolina, when they're polled, say it's a huge issue. My neighbors, they tell me that it's a huge issue because they're feeling it everywhere.
Joe Biden caused the problem. He told us he was going to do it. The magnitude of the problem is so egregious. It's the number one issue on the minds of the American people. And the solution to the problem could be with Congress. If we would just say, we're not going to fund the processing and releasing of any more migrants into the country. That's what we could do. Short of that, we're going to have to wait for an election, hopefully have President Trump win so we can get back to a chief executive who actually will enforce the border. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Nadler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hamilton, you authored Chairman Jordan's August 2023 amicus brief before the Fifth Circuit in Missouri versus Biden, correct?
That's correct.
And that brief cites heavily to transcripts from interviews taken by this committee, correct?
That's correct.
Were you provided access to those transcripts?
I was provided access to transcripts, yes.
How were they made available to you?
Well, I'm not going to get into anything further, anything that would be protected by a privilege. So no, I'm not
Wait a
going to
minute.
answer that question.
How you got access to transcripts is not protected by privilege.
Well, sure it is. In my communications, in the way that I talk with my client, in the method in which I receive things from them is protected.
Okay, but you got the transcripts. Are you aware that these transcripts have not been released to the public?
I have no awareness of anything. I have awareness of what my client
That's an
tells
interesting
me.
admission. Are you aware that I sent Mr. Jordan a letter this past August explaining that the brief you wrote repeatedly misrepresented what witnesses actually said in those interviews?
I have heard about a letter that was sent by you.
Are you aware that it is a sanctionable violation of Rule 11 of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure to knowingly misrepresent facts before a tribunal?
I am certainly aware of the rule. I'm certainly aware that we did not violate the rule.
If you believe that you correctly and honestly represented the facts brought out in those witness interviews, will you join me in calling on Mr. Jordan to make all of the transcripts public without delay?
I will do no such thing at this point in time.
Why
no.
not?
I'm not going to engage in a debate with you in something that I have with one of my clients in open hearing.
Okay, so let me summarize. There is testimony before a closed hearing of this committee. Transcribed interview before a closed hearing of this committee. Those transcriptions or transcriptions of those interviews are made available to you. You use them in a letter. You use them in a brief that you write. Those transcripts have not been released to the public, and allegations have been made, including by me, in a long letter to Mr. Jordan, that there were misrepresentations of those transcripts, and you won't join me in asking that they be made public so we can see whether, in fact, I am correct in saying that your letter, or your brief rather, misrepresents those transcripts. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to place my August 2023 letter to Mr. Jordan into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Melnick, my colleagues on the other side of the dais seem fixated on the idea that the President and the executive branch have the ability to exert total control over the border, even going so far as to force an impeachment of Secretary Mayorkas because he could not adhere to the impossible, quote, operational control, close quote, standards of the Secure Fence Act. Has any president of any party ever been able to exert total operational control over the border in accordance with the standards for the Secure Fence Act?
No, not at all.
Has any country in modern history been able to exert such control over their borders?
No, no country in human history has been able to shut the border to 100% of crossers. And in fact, every presidential administration, the last 3, have all released many people crossing the border.
Thank you. When was the last time that Congress reformed the immigration system to expand lawful pathways, and have encounters at the border increased or decreased since that time?
The last time Congress expanded lawful pathways was November 1990, 1 month before the first website went online. At the time, crossings were a little bit higher than they are today, but at the time, only about 1 in 3 people crossing was even detected. Today, 70 to 80% of people crossing are detected, given all the border security apparatus that's been built up since then.
But the numbers are about the same.
About the same. It's hard to say because we don't have data on unique encounters, but
Okay.
Not that different.
In May of 2023, last year, the American Immigration Council published a report entitled Beyond the Border Solution, outlining recommendations for long-term fixes to the problems in our immigration system, rather than focusing on short-term patches. In the time we have left, can you please discuss some of the solutions you proposed in that report and how they would be more effective than trying to unilaterally shut down the border?
The first and most important thing Congress can do is just put resources in the system. You cannot adjudicate asylum claims at the border rapidly if you don't have the asylum officers to do it. You cannot have immigration cases heard rapidly if you don't have the immigration judges to do it. You need to get the system functioning again, and the only way to do that is if Congress steps in. Unfortunately, earlier this week, I think today, Congress voted to actually cut the budget of the Immigration Court, cutting it by $16 million. This is not the way forward. We need to increase that budget.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Mr. Roy.
Thank the chairman. Thank the witnesses for being here and providing your testimony. Mr. Homan, a quick question. Would you characterize my engagement with the Trump administration with respect to border security as strong, as supportive of what the Trump administration was doing and working with you, maybe Mr. Morgan and others, to try to accomplish the objectives of securing the border of the United States?
Yes, sir.
Would you characterize, based on your knowledge, that in some way, shape, or form, I, though, bow down to the former president? Would you think that would be the common knowledge of people out in the world, that somehow that is my position?
Not you.
Is it true that I endorsed an opponent of the former president in the primary?
Yes, sir.
Is it true that the former president called on a primary challenger for me in December?
Sir.
That the former president called on a primary challenger for me in December?
Yes, sir.
So the reason I bring that up is, are you also aware that I opposed fairly vigorously and loudly the Senate bill prior to the former president's commentary on the bill?
You and every expert I know that wore the uniform and did the job.
And numerous Republicans that you know and work with that were concerned and seeking guidance on what we were hearing in terms of what the Senate bill was going to be and how it was produced, expressed opposition to the bill prior to the former president commenting on the bill.
Yes, because we believe H.R. 2 is a fix.
And so the Senate bill was a fix.
No, we believe H.R. 2.
You believe H.R. 2 is the bill that would fix the problem. The Senate bill is a bill that was a fake bill by our Democratic colleagues to have something to hide behind.
The Senate bill would not have solved the problem. H.R. 2 would have solved the problem because it's based on policies that we prove were effective.
So this notion that our Democratic colleagues are putting forth for people to believe as we head into the State of the Union tonight that the Senate bill would actually solve the problem is false. And the idea that somehow it is Republicans who are the problem because they put up a fake bill that wouldn't secure the bill, that would codify the mass releases, that is somehow the actual reality, correct?
I think the Senate bill was an attempt to switch gears and put it on the Republicans because they never passed the House.
So to that point, I think it is critically important for Mr. Hamilton, you'd have the opportunity to maybe respond to some of the accusations made about the Trump administration, about the policies. Do you have some thoughts on those?
Well, I certainly do, and thank you for the time. Look, our policies that we adopted across the Trump administration and throughout the Trump administration were about securing the border, about protecting the integrity of our immigration system, and reducing human suffering. It's undoubted. No one can deny the fact that there are countless people who are harmed on the journey up to the United States, who are trafficked, who are enslaved here in the United States. And if we want to talk about family separations, I'd like to point out that this administration's policies have led to 500,000 children being separated by their parents coming to the United States by themselves and subjected to who knows what and lost by this Department of Health and Human Services. No one cares. No one cares where those kids are in this administration. No one's going out and looking for them. So for all these crocodile tears that are shed about what happened in a prosecution policy during the Trump administration, nobody cares about the 85,000 plus kids that this administration has lost and the 500,000 kids who have been trafficked here during this administration.
And the children that have been lost by this administration, they don't even know where they are, right, through ORR.
They're gone.
And another issue here that I think merits consideration is the extent to which the allegation that you've got members of the Republican conference who have expressed a belief that this administration could actually reverse a lot of the damage that it has done, compared to our simultaneous belief that we need legislation to fix problems. Those two things can be true, correct? The idea that we're talking about 212F, which by the way has not been fully explored, but also the notion that parole has been being abused for mass releases, which is precisely how the individual got into the United States that killed Lake and Riley, by mass releases. Is that true, Mr. Hamilton?
That's true.
Is that true, Mr. Homan?
Yes.
And so the idea that you don't also need legislation to deal with Flores, catch and release, the issues that you had previous rulings by courts that caused the family separation type issues is false. Of course we need legislation, but we need legislation that works. H.R. 2 would work. The legislation would actually solve problems. It would create an environment where we could enforce the law. It would hold the administration accountable, and it would give power for states to be able to hold it accountable. And the idea that you can't have that at the same time as saying that this president is responsible through mass parole to endangering the American people is a fiction by our Democratic colleagues trying to obfuscate and cover up for the open border policies killing Americans. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, let me say that no Democrat, and I imagine no Republican, is for any kind of criminal activity. None of us condemn any kind of criminal activity. And I believe any criminal that preys on our taxpayers should be prosecuted. And the United States is no place for a criminal. You know, a few years ago, I came home from work to police sirens, police activity, many police cars in my neighborhood. Later on, I found out that a man had been caught in the middle of an act of raping a woman in a local laundry room, an apartment laundry room. Later on, the local police chief had told me that they had determined through investigation that this man was responsible for at least 20 rapes that had been reported. All the victims were undocumented, and the perpetrator was an American citizen. The perpetrator was an American citizen. No place in our society for these animals. Mr. Melnick, I'm going to ask you, what's a secure border?
I mean, that's a hard question to answer, but because the definition depends on everybody. The border has had, is it a border?
I'm going to
that
ask you
100%
again,
of people-
have
yeah.
we ever had a secure border on any administration?
No administration has ever 100% shut the border.
Mr. Melnick, that President Trump or President Biden caused the COVID epidemic.
No.
Is the border challenge right now that we have essentially a refugee crisis at our border? Is that unique to the United States?
No, every country in the Western Hemisphere is
Colombia has about 3 to 4 million refugees that they're dealing with. Costa Rica's ambassador was screaming at us the other day. He's got a refugee challenge. Mexico, and this morning I found out even Jordan has a major challenge with refugees. And of course, Germany and the rest of Europe. So my question to you is, why are people coming? I found out that by the time women from Central America reach our border, about 80% of them are either raped or sexually abused. And they prepare their bodies for that eventuality. So my question would be, from me to you, is why in God's name would a woman undertake that dangerous trip north? Is it because they're looking for a place to enjoy a vacation? Or why would they come north?
No one wants to leave home. They leave because they have no other options, or they feel that they have no other options. And because our legal immigration systems just don't allow people to come here in a way that we would want them to. Again, because we have 7.6 million people waiting in green card backlogs. It is taking people 20 years to get visas to come here, and that has allowed unscrupulous actors to sell this idea that coming to the southern border is the only way. And of course, it's a mixed flow. We have people arriving at our border today who have slam dunk asylum claims. And we have people who are just coming because the United States is the safest and most secure nation in the region. And we don't have a process.
Is that something new, or is that something that's been going on here for a couple of 100 years?
No, it's not new. What is new is, I think, how far abroad people are coming from. But certainly this idea of coming to the United States this way is not new. People have been crossing our border for over a century.
So would you say right now the debate here in this country are confusing the refugee asylum challenge with immigration reform? Sounds like we're talking the same issue, but we really have two different issues. Today, my guest at the State of the Union is a dreamer who's been here almost all her life. She's studying medicine in my district, can't find that line to that door we keep talking about. Her family can't either, yet they've been productive members of this society for 20, 30 years. Are those two issues being kind of convoluted right now politically?
Yeah, for most people, there's no line that they can get into. There's no
because there's no door.
Get there. There's no door. And if we just have a myopic focus on just the U.S.-Mexico border and we ignore everything else that's happening in the
Mexico
hemisphere,
helping us at the border? Are they being a partner with us, or are they not?
our relationship with Mexico is incredibly entangled on migration. They have been providing more and more assistance.
Our guards in blue and green uniforms have told me they've never had better cooperation with Mexico at the border.
It has been since Programa Frontera Sur under President Obama in 2014, we have had increasing cooperation with the Mexican government, but of course, that has not been enough given the scale of migration and displacement in the Western Hemisphere over the last few years.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Once time has expired, Mr. Biggs.
Thank you. Mr. Homan, who controls the U.S. southern border?
Criminal cartels in Mexico.
Who directs who's going to enter between the ports of entry?
The criminal cartels in Mexico control our southern border. They decide who goes where, when, and how.
Yeah. When was the last time you were at the border, Mr. Homan?
10 weeks ago.
Yeah. Mr. Arthur, My question for you is, you aware of the Supreme Court's ruling in Trump v. Hawaii?
I am, sir.
That dealt with presidential authority on, regarding entry of non-U.S. citizens, non-U.S. persons into the country. Can you explain to us what the holding was in that court? Not dicta, but the holding.
The holding in that case was that the travel restrictions that the Trump administration had implemented, which were implemented under Section 212F of the Immigration and Nationality Act, were valid. And the Supreme Court looked at 212F and they stated that it exudes deference to the executive in every clause.
It exudes deference to the executive branch. So, Mr. Hamilton, does that mean that Congress needs to pass a new law immediately for this administration to try to grapple with the massive invasion from the people coming across the border?
I think that there are a number of tools that this administration has abandoned, and there are a number of tools that are available that have yet to be further explored and expanded upon that Congress has already provided that could secure the border and begin securing the border tomorrow.
Give me an example of one of those tools.
MPP.
Don't you need Mexico to cooperate in order to implement MPP?
You need to overcome their will. It is a battle of wills, and Mexico is never going to want to accept it.
And Mexico indeed did not want to accept it, right, Mr. Homan, when the previous administration under Donald Trump was trying to implement MPP?
Yeah, I was kind of taken back over some of the last conversations that relationships with Mexico have never been better. They were excellent under President Trump. They put military on the southern border and northern border. They entered the Remain in Mexico program. They entered the third escape country agreements. I've never seen cooperation better than it was under President Trump.
Yeah, you know, so I find it really interesting. I mean, on the many times that I've been down at the border, I remember seeing Mexican National Guard in Juarez. I remember seeing them in various other locations along the southern border, including in Agua Prieta and Naco. I mean, I saw them. We actually had mild discourse with them. So I find it very interesting. Let's talk now about what else is happening. What other authorities are necessary? I mean, what does this president say? He's never really said what authority he thinks he lacks. Mr. Arthur, have you ever heard him say or identify any authority that he thinks he needs?
The president usually references a comprehensive immigration bill that he introduced on his first day in office back in 2021 that is really just kind of a major amnesty. It doesn't have any enforcement power.
Right. And so if we're going to bring this under control, I guess, Mr. Homan, what would you say the first step is to bring the border under control with the current authorities? You agree that with Mr. Hamilton's MPP is a great option, but what else?
MPP was a game changer for the Trump administration. It moved illegal immigration to 40-year low. We got to stop catch and release. As my colleague Mr. Hamilton said before, the more you release, the more that come. People around the world right now, you can cross the border legally. You'll be released in 24 hours. You'll be flown to the city of your choice. You begin work authorization. You get a free hotel room, 3 squares a day, and medical attention. The most vulnerable people in the world are going to put themselves in the hands of criminal cartels to take advantage of that. We got to end catch and release. And that's why the Remain in Mexico program worked, because after it got going in a few months, they stopped coming. Yeah, they realized they weren't being released in the United States.
So I want to point out that the Yuma sector in 2021, anybody know how many encounters were at the Yuma sector for the entire year? The last year that Donald Trump was president, 2020. 8,600. 142 miles along that. 8,600. You know how many Yuma gets, about how long it takes him to get to 8,600? It's about 9 days now. And when I was recently down on the TO reservation, San Miguel, there is nothing on the Mexican side for 45 miles. Caborca's the nearest village. They're seeing 600 to 1,000 people a day. Yeah, this administration has plenty of authority to bring this under control. Yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's always fascinating to me to hear folks talk about how often they've been to the border or they parachute in to observe the border. I live on the U.S.-Mexico border. I represent a wonderful community on the border, raised my kids on the border, proud third-generation border resident. There's so much to fact-check in the conversation that's gone on to this point. It's hard to pick. But let me start with number one, this idea that the president alone can essentially change the status quo on immigration. If that were true, why would my Republican colleagues have put so much time and energy into filing their immigration bill, H.R. 2, which, by the way, relies almost completely on Mexico to accept nearly every migrant arriving at the southern border, something that's never happened, something that will never happen. Not only is it an interesting irony that they say the president can do it, but here's our great bill that will solve it, again, kind of incongruous. But I'd like to introduce a couple of articles into the record, so I'd ask unanimous consent. The first from June 20th, 2018, Washington Post, and the headline, Trump urges House GOP to fix immigration system. Second article from January 1st, 2019, Politico, the article where the president says, current authorities are woefully inaccurate to meet the scope of the problem, said President Trump, complaining about illegal or gaps in U.S. law.
Without objection.
Thank you so much. Also, there's a letter that President Trump sent us January 4th, 2019, a letter to Congress asking Congress to take action. So the whole premise of this hearing is that the president alone can do it. Donald Trump, throughout his tenure, was asking Congress to act. The second falsehood that I would like to debunk, one of our witnesses said, quote, Dems don't want an end to this crisis. I'd like to refresh everyone's memory that there have been multiple efforts to address our broken immigration system where Democrats actually were willing to vote in a bipartisan manner. 2006, 2014, 2018. Every single one of those bills included strong border security components along with legal pathways. Who sabotaged the bills all of those years? It was Republicans. And then this year, 2024, no longer were Democrats demanding legal pathways in exchange for border security. On the Senate side, Republicans got everything they wanted in what was called the toughest border bill ever by Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Before there was even any ink on paper, Republicans decided to abandon that effort because as a member of this committee, Mr. Nils, said very transparently, why would we fix the problem going into an election? And former President Trump himself said, I don't want them to fix it, they can blame me. So much more to debunk, but I'd like to actually close by asking one of our experts, Mr. Melnick, thanks to the work that you do. You know, the Republican colleagues frequently complain that Democrats are open borders, which couldn't be further from the truth. But the only people going on TV consistently talking about open borders are Republicans. Can you tell us what impact that makes, what message that sends to migrants, to have Republicans constantly talking about open borders in America?
Well, I think as we've seen over the last decade, you know, migrant misinformation shared with migrants is a very heavy driver of people coming to the border. And to the extent that people say things like the U.S. border is open, I think it does send a message. But of course, in 2018, when I was down talking to separated families, I saw people tell me, I had one person tell me, President Trump opened the border to families, that's why I'm here. So this misinformation is not new, it's not something that's just happening now in the last 3 years.
And unfortunately, there's plenty of misinformation coming from the other side of the dais and from some of our panelists. Thank you, I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. You know, I guess the other side's trying to say here we had never had a secure border. Never had it, but we know better. The American people know better. They feel it, they see it, they hear it, they see it in their neighborhoods. They're watching Americans get killed, cities decay, budgets explode in towns, cities, and counties, and in states. The president, this president, President Biden, changed that. Let's just tell the real story of what happened. He ran on it. He spoke about it. He bragged about it. He let Title 42 lapse. He didn't stop catch and release. And he didn't continue with the Remain in Mexico policy. He didn't do his job. I'm not saying he can do every single thing, but what I am saying is what people know, what you all know, which everybody watching this knows, it's gotten much, much worse with this president on purpose. Every hearing we have, and you know, let me say another thing. We're all debating here with our nice suits and dresses in a comfortable building, but meanwhile, people are getting hurt, people are dying, including because we're out of control on the border and the cartels control the border, including the illegal immigrants themselves. And we didn't even talk about the drugs today. By the actions of this president, we have increased, and it's true. I'm not exaggerating, drug addiction in this country with fentanyl. Every hearing we have, every report we read, every statistic we see paints the same picture. Our southern border is in crisis now, and it wasn't before. Under the Biden administration, more than 8 million illegal entries have changed and come into our country, and our global world looks at us as a laughingstock. And every day the administration refuses to act in a real way. In this fiscal year, we've already seen a higher number of illegal entries than any year of President Trump's term. That's a fact. Let's tell the truth. I'm fact-checking too. That's a fact. It's gotten so bad it makes you question exactly how an administration could even look Americans in the face like he will tonight and say this. But when they ignore every law they can and dismantle every effective policy they can, there can be only one conclusion, and it's to change the country. And it's to change it in a way that you all can't deal with and you're not here tonight, but it's to change the Electoral College and to change congressional redistricting. That's the real world. This administration's policies not only failed the law, they failed Americans. And how many innocent Americans are they going to allow to be harmed or even murdered? And we can't fix it with half-hearted attempts. The Senate bill, a bill that doesn't build the wall, a bill that doesn't completely end catch and release, a bill that would pay hundreds of millions of dollars to NGOs that help illegals subvert our laws. It's a bad bill. The only thing worse than where we are now is to pretend that you do something, and I don't give a damn if you're a Republican or a Democrat. Don't pretend to do something and do nothing. That's what that bill was. It was a political tool. Tom Homan. Mr. Homan, in your view, why have the numbers of illegal entries exploded since President Biden took office?
Because he abolished every policy that we proved effective in the Trump administration.
We know the answer to these questions. Mr. Hamilton, the Biden administration claims it needs new laws to provide any help, any sources to fix the border. Is that true? Is it just resources?
No, and you cannot out-resource your way out of this crisis. You have to have policy changes.
Can you tell us, Mr. Hamilton, the most successful, real quickly, Trump-era policies and what the impact of the Biden administration ending them? I don't know what we're arguing about. He ended policies that were working. We were better then than we are now, and you can shape it any way you want. Never has it been a 100% secure border, but it was a hell of a lot better. And when you try to say that it wasn't, people know you're not being truthful with them because they just feel it all around them. But anyhow, can you tell us just real quickly a few of the most successful?
Look, some of the most successful policies worked as a patchwork. They worked with each other, tongue and groove, to ensure that we would dry up the number of people who were coming to the United States illegally, and that we would be able to adjudicate quick cases as quickly as we can in the United States and get people back home who don't qualify for anything. So that includes MPP, that includes asylum cooperative agreements, that includes other asylum reforms. The list goes on and on.
Quick last question, yes or no? Is the border worse off now than it was 4 years ago under President Trump? Mr. Arthur, I'll start with you, right down the line. Is it better off now, or was it better off then? Period. Yes or no?
It was better off then, sir.
Mr.
It's
Holman?
historically worse now.
Not that much better.
Not that much better than, okay. Still, you admit it's better, and that's hard, because you're the...
Mr. Hamilton?
Yes, Mr. Hamilton.
And then
We're done.
the gentleman's...
Better in some ways, worse in others.
It was far better under President Trump.
I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Ms. Ross.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to enter into the record an article by Han DeHaas entitled "Border Crackdowns Won't Solve America's Immigration Crisis" that was published in the Wall Street Journal last week.
Without objection.
In this article, which I commend to everyone who's here and anybody who's watching, DeHaas highlights the economic drivers of immigration on our side of the border that are often are ignored in these policy discussions. The reality is that our economy needs more workers. And in this intense labor market, that drives immigration. I hear this from employers in my own district in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. They are begging for legal pathways to hire more workers. And we've heard this for the last 2 days in Washington, D.C. from the Business Roundtable. Migrants accept the cost and risk of journeying to the United States because they understand that their labor is in demand here and that employment will be easy to come by. In fact, DeHaas makes the point that immigration restrictions actually lead workers who might move to the U.S. temporarily for seasonal work to stay, since their opportunities to come and go are severely limited. Because of the militarization of the border, we no longer have the labor flow that we used to have. Instead, we have a population of migrant workers living in the United States year-round. And we have perverse policies like deporting kids who have come here legally with their parents, who age out of our immigration system because they simply cannot get a visa to stay because the lines are so long. More than 200,000 documented dreamers. I have a bipartisan bill that has passed this House twice to give them at least the ability to stay here, contribute their talents, and be with their families, not be deported to a place that they didn't know. And they, Mr. Chairman, came here legally. If Republicans were serious about solving the border crisis, they would crack down on the economic drivers of migration in this country. Mr. Melnick, do we need to expand employment and family-based immigration?
Absolutely. We haven't touched those laws in 33 years.
And can you discuss how the creation of additional legal pathways can impact the numbers we're seeing at the border?
There are a lot of people who are coming today who would like to come here legally, but no pathways exist. And I think the best example to demonstrate this is what the Biden admin has done with Haitian migrants. About no Haitian migrants, virtually none, are crossing the border illegally now, and that's because the Biden admin has expanded legal pathways through them for parole. But those pathways are narrow, not applicable to everybody, and fragile. And without Congress stepping in, that success could be reversed overnight.
Especially with what's going on in Haiti as we speak. What additional legal pathways should Congress think about creating?
Not just temporary guest worker programs that would let people come, but also ways for people to come here more permanently and be here with friends and families. People should not have to wait 80 years to get a visa, but there are people today, Indian nationals in particular, who are. And you see this, people who would normally have come here on visas who say, the legal immigration system just is not available to me. The only thing I think I can do, people will sell me on, is coming to the border. And that is not how the system should function.
And would the expansion of legal pathways lead to a more orderly and safe process at the border? And if so, why?
Yes, by addressing this issue in a comprehensive way, we have to look beyond just the lens of what is happening exactly at the border. We have to look at what's happening in our legal immigration system, and we have to look at what's happening globally. If all we do is pay attention to the border and don't think about all these other broken parts of our system, we're just going to find ourselves here again 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now.
Thank you. And Mr. Chairman, I just want to share with people, before I came back to Washington, I went to the annual farm breakfast that we have with our farming community in North Carolina. All across North Carolina they came. Number one issue was having more legal pathways for people who work in the agriculture business in North Carolina, which is the number one industry in North Carolina. I represent the high-tech, medical industries. They want the skilled workers, the H-1B workers, but the farm industry, number one issue, immigration. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired. Mr. Moore.
Mr. Homan, 2020 we had 4,651 Mexican encounters or U.S.-Mexico border encounters. That was in 2020. In 2021, it went to 1.7 million in 12-month period. What changed? Why did it go from 400,000 to 1.7 million in 12-month period? How's that possible?
Because President Biden abolished the Trump policies that were effective.
What policies?
Remain in Mexico policy, the MPP, the third safe country agreement we had with Central American country, Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, ending catch and release. Building the wall. The wall works. Every place they built a wall, illegal immigration went down, illegal drug flow went down, but the wall, more importantly, saved lives because the women and children, the most vulnerable who couldn't get over that wall, would go to a place where it's not a wall. And guess what's waiting for them? The men and women of the Border Patrol, who would give them first aid and take care of their humanitarian needs.
Mr. Homan, we went to the border, it's been years ago, a couple years ago now, with Congressman Biggs, and you remember the little girls, the kids they threw over, you remember they brought the two children to the high place in the wall and tossed them over down to the concrete, right?
Yes.
And while they were doing that, my understanding was that was just a decoy. They tossed that 3-year-old and 5-year-old child over the wall so that others could come through in the opening up the road. So as the border agents were going to the rescue to those kids, in turn, the cartel were smuggling people into an opening down the road. And so we were talking about children and women. They talk about how cruel we are for separating the women or the children from their parents. My understanding is we've lost 100,000 children. We don't know where they're at. Is that the number that you're hearing? Since this administration took over, 100,000 children?
Approximately 100,000, and HSI ISIS has numerous investigations of finding these children, for instance, cleaning up entrails in a meatpacking plant, a midnight shift, being forced into debt servitude. I mean, these children have been trafficked. Now, and I can't say every one, the 100,000 been trafficked, but we know many have. I've done this for 34 years. I've conducted many trafficking investigations. A lot of these children are living the life of hell right now.
In one specific case, I remember, we had one sponsor that got 20 children. We shipped 20 children to this one location, but did not do a background check. You can't work a nursery in a church without a background check. And we sent 20 of these children to a place, to one sponsor, with no background check. What's happening? When you say indentured servants, tell me what you mean by this indentured servitude that you mentioned when you're talking in your testimony. What does that look like?
That's how they pay their smuggling fees. When they get smuggled in the United States, they'll owe the cartel. Their family owes the cartel smuggling fees, and they're forced to do labor to pay those smuggling fees.
So these moms and dads send their children, put them in the custody of this cartel, and then they have a fee they have to pay back. Is that what's going on?
Approximately 450,000 children have been smuggled across the border in the hands of criminal cartels.
And they're servants, basically. They're indentured servants now to the cartel.
Many are.
Unbelievable, unbelievable. Mr. Hamilton, what do you think, how did his administration utilize the Section 212F to make the patchwork? Is that what you call it? Is that how we did it? Did y'all secure the border? Because Sheriff Daniels came in 40 years, 4 decades on the U.S. southern border. He said in 2018 he had never seen it any more secure than it was then, and it's not worse. It's never seen it worse than it is today. What were y'all able to do that worked?
Look, I think, again, without sounding like a broken record, MPP was a critical program. You have to dry up the flow. You can't just keep processing on the back end and allowing people to come into the United States. You have to dry up the flow of people who get caught and released into the United States, because ultimately, that's the only thing that matters.
Yeah, and it's
The
not
only
us
thing is
talking about it on the news. It's them calling back home on the free cell phone saying, hey, we got a job, or we got subsidies, or we got a place to stay. Y'all come join us. That, when you talk about dried up, you talk about putting pressure on the border. When you open it up that way, once we get them in here and they know they're calling back home, then it just continues to flow. And that, I tell everybody, a closed border is a compassionate border. We're losing children, we're losing families, we're having families separated, obviously, but also just the death, the people trying to make that trip, and the women getting raped. The compassion is the closed border. But so you're saying that just, it's, when they know they've got, once they get it, to get here. I was told they get a free cell phone at $800 in Yuma, Arizona. That was the testimony that a sheriff gave me, under oath, by the way. And so, but then we just ship them wherever. So that's just, that's the issue, right? I mean, once they know that if they come here, they've got an opportunity, it's hard to stop it, isn't it?
That's precisely right. It's the only thing that matters is release into the United States and the ability to get work, whether with or without authorization. And that's precisely why the Senate bill is such a disaster, because instead of stopping catch and release, what the Senate bill does is it mandates catch and release for significant numbers of aliens coming to the United States. So instead of solving the problem, it's just going to exacerbate the problem and make things worse.
My time's up, and with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my colleagues have laid out a pretty comprehensive case as to why the Biden administration has the authority to fix this very border crisis that he created. And how did he create this border crisis? By rescinding President Trump's executive orders. Instead, I want to talk about today the deadly results of Biden's decision to open the border and his decision to not act within his power to reverse this deadly course. Right now, we are witnessing a historic and devastating wave of migrants taking the lives of one innocent American after another. This horrible reality is treated as a conspiracy theory on the left. That's not true. And since President Biden won't protect the victims of migrant crime or even be bothered to say their names, I will use my 5 minutes to speak for the victims of migrant crime. Look at the victims behind me. Their lives were taken from them because of Biden's decision to open our border so that violent criminals and gangs from other countries can terrorize and murder American citizens. These victims of migrant crime cannot speak for themselves, so I will speak for them. And I want to specifically speak on behalf of several victims from my home state of Texas. Unfortunately, I don't have enough time to speak on behalf of all of them. Alex Wise Jr. was a 10-year-old boy from Midland. He was walking home from school when an illegal immigrant ran him over with his car and killed Alex. This illegal immigrant who took Alex's life had previously been deported not once, not twice, not thrice, not 4 times, 5 times. And guess what? Under President Biden, he came right back. Another victim is 16-year-old Lisbeth Medina, a high school cheerleader from Edna, Texas. When Lisbeth did not show up to the town's lighted Christmas parade, where she was scheduled to perform with the rest of her cheer squad, her worried mom rushed home and found her daughter stabbed to death. Who killed her? An illegal immigrant. And then there's a story of 11-year-old Maria Gonzalez. Maria was home alone while her father went to work. She told her dad that she was worried because someone was knocking on the door. When her father returned home from work, he found his daughter's body stuffed in a plastic trash bag beneath a bed. She had also been sexually assaulted. Her murderer, an illegal immigrant. Now, as a father of 2 little girls, if I ever saw my children in that state, I'm getting some real Samuel L. Jackson, A Time to Kill vibes right now, and everyone should feel the exact same way. If you don't, there's something wrong with you. Unfortunately, these stories are not isolated incidences. What I've shared with you today is one tragic murder after murder, weaving together a large tapestry of migrant crime. Mr. Homan, thank you for being here, sir. Under President Trump, you served as the acting director of ICE. In your professional opinion, sir, what is the best way to deal with this massive issue of migrant crime?
Get rid of sanctuary. You got to end sanctuary cities. Sanctuary cities provide haven for sanctuaries for criminals. Bottom line, period. Sanctuary cities do not protect the immigrant communities. When they release the illegal alien criminal back into the community, the very community in which he lives, he's going to re-victimize the same victim, same witnesses. The immigrant community don't want criminals in their neighborhoods either.
Thank you, sir. Up until this point, President Biden and the White House have been unable to say Lincoln Riley's name to date, or the other victims that I have mentioned here today, but they have no problem with uttering no and comment when it comes to Lincoln Riley's murder. Let me lay this out for everyone. But for Biden's open border, Lincoln Riley would still be a Georgia college student. But for Biden's open border, Alex Wise would still be able to go to middle school. But for Biden's open border, Elizabeth Medina would still be cheering in Edna, Texas this fall. But for Biden's open border, Maria Gonzalez's father would have been able to walk her down the aisle someday instead of finding her stuffed in a trash bag under a bed. And finally, but for Biden's open border, all of the victims behind me would probably still be alive. Tell me I'm wrong. Don't believe what the media is telling you. President Biden's hands aren't tied. He has the power to close the border today like President Trump would do if you're in office right now. All he has to do is reinstate the policy set forth by President Trump a few years ago. Mr. President, we're waiting. Enough Americans have already died. And with that, I yield back, and thank you, Mr. Homan, for being here, sir. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, gentleman. Yields back. We've discussed the importance of resuming the Remain in Mexico policy. We had it under Trump. Biden canceled it in his first day in office. So obviously it can be done because it was done under the same laws that we have today. The Border Patrol leadership told us at Eagle Pass that that alone would reduce the flow by about 70%. Mr. Homan, you mentioned the wall. It was nearing completion on Inauguration Day. Border Patrol tells us that that's an absolutely necessary force multiplier for them. So obviously that could be done because that was being done under the same laws that we have today. And once again, Biden canceled that. What else could be done under current law? If you were advising the president right now, what else? Remain in Mexico.
The first thing I would do is remain.
What else?
First thing I would do is remain in Mexico. That was a game changer. That moved the immigration down to 40-year low. Highest courts in the land said it's legal. He can simply dust off the plans and put it back in action. Third safe country agreements. I don't know why any administration would destroy an agreement with the Central American countries that if you're really escaping fear and persecution from your homeland government and you get to a free country, claim asylum there. So are you really escaping fear of persecution is all about getting to the United States. I've heard some testimony today that they're coming for jobs. I get it. They're coming for a better life. I get it. But that's not asylum. So the asylum fraud, abuse on the border, for those that really do need it across this world, there are thousands of people that need asylum protection from their home government. They're sitting in the back seat because the system's overflown with frauds and asylum claims. So the Remain in Mexico program, the third safe country agreements, and country release, and continue building the wall. Every place they built a barrier, illegal immigration went down. It's not the end all to be all, but I said it earlier, the most important thing about the wall is the most vulnerable cannot get over the wall. They're going to go to a place where there's not a wall. And most of the time, Border Patrol will be waiting on. Border Patrol saved tens and thousands of lives on that border because they were put in place where they had a cross where there wasn't a wall and Border Patrol was waiting on them.
Mr. Arthur, what else? Any other thoughts on what could be done under current law by this administration?
Yeah, no, and I have to wholeheartedly concur with Mr. Homan, but I'm going to tell you another person who probably would concur with him as well. In 2007, when he was running for president, then Senator Joe Biden appeared in Winterset, Iowa, and he talked about the importance of a wall. He talked about the value of a wall to stopping people from entering the United States and slowing down the transmission of drugs into the country. Now, he didn't say, and of course there were caveats and things like that that went along with it. I don't know if you've been to the border. I've been there plenty of times.
And by the way, the Border Patrol tells me everything that you guys just did, that the wall's absolutely essential, that the Remain in Mexico policy was working very well, and it all came to a halt on Inauguration Day.
Absolutely. And again, it's not going to stop anybody from entering the United States, but it will slow them down, and it makes it a force multiplier for the 17,000 plus Border Patrol agents that we have down there. It makes it so much harder for the drug cartels to move drugs into the United States. Before they put the wall in Yuma, there were 2,500 drive-throughs a year. Once they put in the wall, there were 2, not 2,000, 2. So, I mean, it is absolutely crucial. I would commend everyone here to go listen to then Senator Biden's remarks in Winterset, Iowa, 2007.
Mr. Hamilton, what would you add?
Without sounding like a broken record, again, some of those same things, but one of the other things that we have to do is we have to take a look at the way that our immigration court system is being abused. It's not necessarily the case that we need lots and lots of more judges. We need a system that is not going to be abused by frivolous claims and unscrupulous attorneys. And that is what happens every single day in the immigration court system.
What percentage of asylum claims turn out to be phony and are rejected by the courts?
So it depends on the demographic, and it depends on if we're talking about claims arising from the border or the interior, but we're talking about in the low teens as an average, is the number of percent that are approved. Now, if you think about that, that means that, 85% are denied. What kind of a world does it make sense?
When they're denied, what normally happens? When the asylum claim is denied, are not most of them, after being ordered to leave, simply disappear?
That's correct. They don't go anywhere. They stay here. There's over 1.3 something million active orders of removal today in the United States. People who had their due process, they had their day in court. They decided to stay here.
Final question very quickly. Mr. Homan, the Democrats have said this has been going on for over a century. There's nothing to see here. Move along. That's just Fox News and Republicans fanning flames. Could you address that point?
Well, all you got to do is look at the numbers under President Trump. I mean, we had the most secure border. It wasn't 100% secured. We had a little more work to do. We had more wall to finish, but it was the most secure border based on data, DHS's own data, than we've ever seen. And we went from the most secure border to historic, never seen before illegal alien encounters. That's just a fact. 3.2 million encounters last year. That is, first year under President Biden, historic record. Second year, he broke his own historic record. Third year, he broke both those 2 years of historic records. We never seen anything like this.
Thank you very much for unanimous consent request.
Thank you. I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record this article, Where the Migrant Protection Protocols Stand, 4 years after going into effect, which show clearly that with 1 million apprehensions over 2 years under the Trump administration, only 70,000 people were actually put into the MPP
Jayapal,
program.
you know that's a request, it's not a speech. Without objection. That concludes today's hearing. I want to, again, thank our witnesses very much for appearing before the committee today. This has been very helpful to us. Without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witnesses or additional materials for the record. And without objection, this hearing is adjourned.